Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Writers Drinking Whiskey, your literary happy hour, the show where the writers of today make fools of themselves in ways the writers of yesteryear could only have imagined. I'm your host and record-setting fool, William R. Hincy, and joining me today, I'm privileged to have David Swinson. David, welcome to the Whiskey Bar.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here. You got some good whiskeys behind you. And
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. So let me give you the brief intro here, and you can add anything I might miss. But you're the author of the critically acclaimed Frank Marr trilogy, which is The Second Girl, Crime Song, and Trigger. You also wrote City on the Edge, and then the latest book is Sweet Thing.
Mhm.
Outside of the writing, you worked for a time here out in Long Beach, which wasn't too far from me. You booked and promoted like punk rock bands and alternative bands at It's the Fenders Ballroom and Bogart's Nightclub, which I don't think
Fenders
exists anymore. Fenders, yeah.
No, neither of them exist. No, they're gone.
Neither, okay. And so you had Fenders and that. You also developed and co-produced the spoken word compilation Sound Bites from the Counterculture. And then I think I love the story. I got, and everyone realizes this very early on, because I really just do my homework by going to your website and listing what you've put on there. But while having a few drinks with Timothy Leary and Bill Stanky, you came up with the idea for the cult classic buddy movie Roadside Prophets. And then after that, though, we took kind of a hard left, basically, and you went into law enforcement, which maybe wasn't a hard left for you, but reading through it, for me, felt like a hard left. And you went into law enforcement, where you started as a uniformed police officer. Eventually, though, you were promoted to be a detective of the Special Investigations Bureau / Major Crimes, and then from there, it led into the writing we started off with. Anything I missed? Anything you'd like to add?
Booking punk and alternative to booking bad guys and gals. Yeah, so it's a natural segue.
Very good. It is. That's what I was like, oh, you just like dealing with troublemakers, I think, basically.
Yeah, actually, the punk rockers were less trouble.
Awesome. So, the first thing I love to start everyone with is just, where in the world are you, and where's the best place to get a drink there?
I'm in upstate New York in the Finger Lake region.
Okay.
I'm not from here. I mean, I just really loved it. And the girl I'm partnered with now, Jennifer, she's from this area. But it's a very small town. There's one pub, which is probably the go-to place to get a burger and a drink, and then it's on Main Street, of course. But then there's one of my favorite places too. It's this guy smoking tails in Phelps, and he's a distiller and he's an undertaker. So I mean, it's a natural thing. But he owns, I think, the local funeral home there, and then
Yeah.
But he's really good. He's won awards, and he was on that show on Discovery called Moonshiners. He was on the first season, I think, or a couple episodes on the first season. But incredible whiskeys and bourbons. I mean, some of them are really, really unique.
Sure. That's hilarious. That you have punk bands and like bad guys. He has like dead people and people drinking themselves to death.
Yeah, I'm not a real drinker anymore. I rarely drink, but when I do, I enjoy a nice whiskey or whatever.
Very good. And I'll link him up. I'll find a link for his website, and I'll put it on the show notes here for anyone that wants to check it out.
A kick out of that. I'll let him know too.
Oh yeah. No, I'll definitely look if they ship out this way at the La La Land here. I'll get a bottle, because that's what I do.
Yeah, he's not. He doesn't distribute.
Oh, okay.
There's a couple of local restaurants that carry it, but he doesn't distribute because he just, when you go in there, it's not only the distillery, but they have a really nice bar, and they're only Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And they do really, really well. So he really doesn't see the need. He doesn't, what he said was it's just a lot of trouble dealing with when you're dealing with that, from
Uh-huh.
state to state, the licensing and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure.
Some to ask
I'm
him.
sure.
I don't know. Yeah.
Very good. Awesome. And so then and that leads me to my first question, which was going through it is, what is the connection between, besides you being the obvious connection, but what's the connection between like booking punk rock bands, spoken word compilations, offbeat buddy, films, and then law enforcement?
Well, I had several majors, but I ended up getting a degree in film at Long Beach State University, California State University in Long Beach.
Long Beach, okay.
They had a really good film department, and a lot of great people came over there. But I'm not saying I'm just one of them. I really wasn't. But I always thought I've always wanted to be a writer, since I was 17. I thought I'd be a screenwriter, and didn't work out that way. So when I got out of college, I met a girl, as is usually the case, and she got me into the scene, alternative and punk, and opened a record store with her on Main Street in Seal Beach, California. Did really well. It was a good venue for record signings, and got a lot of punkers and alternative types that went there. But Seal Beach, the conservative city they really didn't put up with it for long. And then by that time, I had found a place called Fender's Ballroom. It held about 1,500 people. And I thought that it would be just again, everything was just really a natural segue, one thing into the other. And I thought that it would be a really cool venue. And as it happened, I, had money tucked away, because you have deposits, you deal with agents, you don't just call the band. My first band I booked was the Violent Femmes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And from there, tons of that, from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Sisters of Mercy, Social Distortion, all the, Orange County, LA, Long Beach punk scene, from, again, Social Distortion to Aggression, Adolescents, the Vandals. It was a sweat box. It was fun. And then it just got really tough being a indie, a guy in that scene. It was, a lot of stuff was hit or miss. And I got connected with a place called Bogart's, which was a real, top 40, those top 40 type clubs where it's sort of a meat market. But and he said, yeah, you can have Sundays, and started with Sunday, and then the Sunday did better than his weekends. And it wasn't long before I got 7 days a week and in-house. So it's the in-house promoter for them. And it was an acclaimed venue. The LA Times, is the City Paper still around? No, not
I don't think so.
The City Paper's Washington, D.C. The LA Weekly is what I meant.
The Weekly, the LA Times is still clinging to life. Yeah. I think they just had layoffs not too long ago, but they're still around. I don't think so. I think I've heard of the Weekly anymore.
It's from the LA Weekly, the LA Times, Orange County Register, Long Beach Press Telegram, and stuff like that. And it just was the venue, in that area. And it was a hot spot because, a lot of the people really, you had your choice between Orange County, and Los Angeles for venues, and, like Cuckoo's Nest and the Roxy, the Whiskey, the Club Lingerie, and all that kind of, because we were the mid-range venue. We weren't like the Wiltern or the Palladium, or, we didn't hold that many people. But a lot of bands that played those large venues, would play Bogart's on it, but you'd have to do it unannounced. You couldn't advertise it in the LA Times because of that show coming up, but they'd still sell out. But the way it happened was, I had a Wednesday night that was really an off night, a dead night. And I got an idea to do evenings of conversation with luminaries like, Hunter S. Thompson, Timothy Leary, G. Gordon Liddy. It was the first to pair G. Gordon Liddy, who arrested Timothy Leary, and paired them together, and, in a conversation. And that actually, they did a little tour with that. But then John Myers and, Abby Hoffman, my gosh, Jim Carroll and, Ray Manzaneric did poetry. from the Doors, Ray, and on and on. And so I got to know Timothy Leary, and a lot of those guys were handled by a guy named Bill Stanky, who's to this day is one of my best friends. And he's in the Manager Hall of Fame, believe it or not. But
very cool.
But
I didn't know there was such a thing. Actually,
I didn't either until he told me. But it's a big thing, I guess. But so it got to a point where I left Bogarts around 1989, and Bill and I, before I left, we wanted to produce an album, and we recorded a lot of people at Bogarts and Club Lingerie and a couple other places like Henry Rollins, Jello Biafra from Dead Kennedys, Eugene McCarthy, Abby Hoffman, Hunter S. Thompson, and Timothy Leary. And we got to deal with Atlantic Records to do a record called Soundbites from the Counterculture. And then I ended up leaving Bogarts and getting into music videos and stuff. So more film stuff, and did like Ozzy Osbourne and a few other people. So that was a natural thing to, I wanted to get into film and be an independent producer. And once at Timothy Leary's house with Bill, he was there. We actually developed an idea for like you said, a buddy film called Roadside Prophets, and ended up getting a deal with New Line Cinema, New Line. And because, Abby Wool, who wrote it, it was a brilliant script. She wrote it. And, at that time, studios really loved writer-directors. And so she ended up directing it. And it wasn't as fun as I thought, but it was fun, a lot of fun. But it just, I don't know. And after that, Hunter Thompson's ex-girlfriend, Layla Nabulsi, had the rights to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. So we worked that for a long time. And I just got to the point where I just, always fancied myself as being in law enforcement and writing about crime, and stuff, because I always wanted to be a writer. So again, a natural thing to do is become a cop, right?
Right.
But so when I was in the academy, Layla actually got Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas made with Johnny Depp attached to it. So I never looked back. I became a cop, and I really didn't know how long I'd stay, but it went by fast. And it's just, that's how it happened in a little nutshell.
And then you're here.
I think I need a sip of whiskey after
that. Very good. I'll comply with that order.
What are you drinking?
I just made an old fashioned. Yeah, I'm proud to my old fashions. I usually just use I think I used a Bullet bourbon today. A lot of times I do a rye, but I just make a very simple old fashioned, and then I always have my side sipper. So I have some have you ever heard of Jefferson's Oceans?
Oh, of course. It's used to be a real, when I again, I don't really drink that much, but I mean, when I lived in Virginia, there was this place I would always get that neat,
Yeah. That's a really good one. Neat. So I have it. I'm just about out of it, but I have it in my little side decanter.
That's yours. I was saying that's not the bottle. But I love that.
No. It's just the little decanter. It's a little Halloween very one. Nice. All of my stuff stays out. There's a Scottish Santa over here that stays out because he's holding whiskey bottles. I can let's see. There's Scottish Santa.
Yeah,
next to my Steelers sign.
Oh wait, I did not want to see Pittsburgh Steelers. Sorry, but I'm Washington, D.C. So I didn't just go there and become a cop, having never lived there. I grew up in D.C., but my dad was so I grew up all around the world, but D.C. was always home base. So since the 80s, I've been an unfortunate Redskins fan. Now Commanders. It's torture. But Pittsburgh Steelers are actually okay. It's not like the Dallas Cowboys or
well, that's true. I know we're not a main rival, so
I mean the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Giants.
Yeah, but it's funny. I had Stephen Hunter on the show, and he's a Ravens fan, and it happened. We happened to record it like right after they lost in the playoffs. And so one of the questions I asked him, because I didn't know if he was a Ravens fan, I knew he was in the area, but I'd asked him like, so are you a Ravens fan? And if so, what makes them Steelers so good?
That's cruel.
He was a really good sport about it. He's funny. He's not one of the Ravens fans that just hates the Steelers. So he had a lot of respect for like Mike Tomlin and a bunch of the things. So, but
I'm
it was
getting a lot
really
of
funny the
pressure to be a
timing.
Buffalo fan.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Yeah, I like him.
Yeah. How far are you from Buffalo?
About an hour and a half.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's not bad at all.
45 minutes from Rochester, about 40 minutes from Syracuse. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, you could always just be a side Buffalo fan until the Commanders get their stuff in order.
Correct. Yeah, that's sort of unfaithful.
Yeah, I know that's true. I could never do it. I tell other people they could, but I have all the Steelers stuff here.
The side is just just something wrong with that.
Right.
But actually, there's. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I tried to actually teach my daughters that. I'm like, look, when you're talking to guys, you want to make sure the guy has his teams and that he sticks to them. And like, well, why does that matter? I'm like, I'm like, that's loyalty. That means he sticks.
But that's
through,
a subtle way, a hint that you're killing your daughter. Yeah. But it's okay, my dad's from Minnesota, so it's okay to like the Vikings because my dad has a connection there.
Sure.
It's okay to like the Rams. Who's in Los Angeles now? Gosh darn, I'm not even.
Rams and the Chargers are here now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The Chargers I can never wrap my head around. I still call them the San Diego Chargers and forget that they moved the 2 hours up here. But so when you went, so I know you said you had ambitions of being like a filmmaker and things. So that's why you had gone to the school. Was it just screenwriting, or did you want to also be like the director, screenwriter, like
No, I wasn't really. I tried my hand at directing, not that good at it. Directors are behind the camera type guy, but I just wanted to be a writer. Just finish it and get it done, and leave it in the right hands to take it from there.
Right. Did you learn anything while you're in film school that you still like used to today with writing your novels?
Not really. No. I mean, I didn't really take a lot of courses in screenwriting there. There was like one course I took. Most of it was production, which I learned a lot about, and things like that. But,
sure.
But my writing, was it's been a lifelong thing. So I've learned from, the way I used to write when I was 17, which I'd never let anybody read, to my 20s and 30s, and I'm not going to date myself, on and on. And I learned, but once I experienced being a cop, and I hate research. I like to write based on life experience. Nothing real though; it's all fiction. I don't base anything on real cases, and that changed everything. It did. It just with the death that I saw, and other things, it's just changed everything. How you look at things, and putting it into words, it changed it. And then obviously meeting, and talking to great writers like who you've had, like Jim Grady, who has always been a buddy, but a mentor of mine too, and other writers who I just, read and adore and learn from, and even like the classics and stuff. So that's really how I learned. And then my editor, who's like one of the best, I'm going to say, in the world, learned a lot from on the first book, The Second Girl. I mean, it just changed my life, some of the stuff I learned from him. When you have not only a creative editor, but there's different kinds of editors. He was not a copy editor. He was the editor, in charge of the imprint at Little Brown, Mulholland Books. And he's edited everyone from Tana French to, Walter Mosley. Some greats, So he knows what he's doing. And I learned a lot from him. Still am learning a lot from him. I owe him another book.
Right. Sure. Yeah, I believe it. That's one of the things I love about writing is that we were talking football, right? You're going to peak at football between 25 and 32, right? And then like it's going to be downhill from there. But writing,
Unless
there's
you're
no
Brett Favre.
yeah, that's true. Brett Favre or Tom Brady that
Tom
plays
Brady,
forever.
yeah. Or
Yeah.
Peyton.
Sure. But even those guys, right? You start talking like 40, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're 40 doing it.
I know, old.
Uh,
I wish I was 40.
right. But the cool thing with like the arts and writing in particular, right, is there's no reason you have to peak at any particular time. You can keep, you can always keep growing and expanding, and just kind of filling in all those cracks, right? Like you're just like water, you just be filling in everything as you go and it's continuing to flow. So
yeah, I'd like to think I improved, but it's really interesting. I was reading like what Quentin Tarantino's thoughts are, and how he has always said, I'm going to do 10 films. And after that, I won't be good anymore. So I'm done after the 10th film. So he's doing his 10th film. We'll see. But I have feeling what he's going to do is he's a good writer. So he's going to keep his, foot in by writing screenplays and stuff like that after, probably producing and stuff like that. But I don't know if I believe that. Because there are a lot of great directors and stuff like that who've done way more than 10 films, and they're
sure,
great. So I don't know where he gets that. Maybe it's just in his head.
Right. Well, maybe he liked the it adds some lore to it, right? Like, oh, this is his ninth movie. You only get one more, right?
Well, he's got to stick to it if he's going to do that.
Right. It's like the supply and demand. There's only like 10 supplies, so you got to rack up demand and go see everything I make.
He's good. I like him.
Oh yeah, he's very good. So I wanted to go back a bit to the sound bites stuff, because I know there was also I think you said it was the Wednesday evenings, right, where you started doing, or either you said it or I read it. But there was Wednesday evenings
conversation in Bogarts.
Right.
Very popular.
Yeah. So that was popular. Was there any of the particular I don't know what you would call them, orations, or like the things that happen on there, any that still stick with you to this day?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, I like before they hit the stage, just talking and sitting with them. One that comes to mind, well, obviously Timothy Leary, but one of them really that comes to mind is Hunter S. Thompson. Like the shows, 2 sold out shows, and I don't even remember how much it was, but for that time, I think it was like $15 or $20, and in that time, that's a lot of money for that time.
Sure.
I mean, I rented a red convertible and picked him up at the airport, and it was crazy. I needed backup, and I got this girl who I knew to come with me as backup, because I mean, the first thing Bill Stanky said when I talked to him on the phone, and I said, would Hunter Thompson be into this? And he goes, "Are you sure you want to do that?" So I mean, that's like, huh? What do you mean? I don't know, Dave. Are you sure you want to get Hunter Thompson? I mean, he was originally going to be the sheriff in Roadside Prophets, and New Line Cinema said, "No, we're not going to have him, because he's too predictable, too crazy." The drugs, obviously. So.
Sure.
But yeah, Hunter S. Thompson really, really stood out. Like, I mean, some of the stuff he said, it was like nothing set. I mean, he went there and he just talked, but it was so timely. Like what he said then about politics and guns and violence and everything is relevant today. I mean, it's totally relevant today.
Sure.
I'm trying to think who else just really. There are so many. It's just like my brain is going dead right now. But I would say Hunter S. Thompson is one of the stayed with me for years.
Sure.
And even in my writing,
Right. Well, I wondered about that. There was, I think it was the New York Times book review. I might be misquoting, but that they described you as like one of the best. What was the term? Like dialogue hound, I think is what they said. One of the best dialogue hounds in the business.
I cried when he said, "What?" I'm one of the best. What? that was
Right.
cool. Yeah, no, I
Oh,
mean, hell yeah, I'll take it. But
yeah, sure.
do I think that? No, I mean, the thing with dialogue that's really interesting with me is ever since I was a kid, I run through dialogue in my head, like with characters and things like that. And I just run it in my head. When I became a detective, um, through the Department of Justice, not, I mean, through the Washington Field Office of the U.S. Attorney's Office, DOJ, I interviewed a lot of, you know, witnesses, defendants and stuff like that, you know, and I learned that, you know, before you go into an interview and, you know, I mean, I would run things in my head that, you know, like, you know, if I ask this and they say this, what am I going to do? So I go through dialogue in my head and just keep going to keep me up late at night
Sure.
because I would just do that. And it became a natural thing to me. And then listening to people talk, obviously, and how they talk and, you know, I don't fudge or fake. I hope I don't. But
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Right. Yeah, do you think
dialogue is incredibly important.
oh, absolutely. Yeah. Do
I
you
mean,
think the time Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say George V. Higgins. It's a classic example, you know, the Friends of Eddie Coyle. It is like totally dialogue driven book, incredible influence on me. It's about 95% dialogue, and the dialogue drives the story, which is like, damn, I mean, you know, how do you
Mm-hmm.
do that? But he did it.
Right, right, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is amazing. Do you think the time with listening to all that spoken word, do you think that helped as well too, or is it more? I mean, it sounds like I think you said Hunter S. Thompson like went up without like a script. I imagine some people have more of a idea of what they're going to say,
Yeah.
if not a script at all. Was listening to all that, kind of editing that to make the record, the sound bites from the counterculture, did that help with that with
I mean,
building up
hours of
that?
that. Yeah, obviously, any dialogue,
Yeah.
listening to anything like that helps. I mean, uh, even if you listen to Hunter S. Thompson on the album, you have to sort of listen to the cut over and over. It's like a new language, you know. You know how like sometimes people with very thick accents, you just go,
Sure.
well, you know, Hunter S. Thompson doesn't have an accent. He just you know, talks mumbles, and you know, like it comes out in like a puff. And it's like, you go, huh? What the hell are you talking? I don't even know what you're saying, man. And it's because like you saw like high and, you know, drunk, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, but that's
Uh-huh.
he said that, you know, I don't put my lifestyle on anybody. He goes,
Right.
that's who I am. That's what I am. I'm basically a guy who loves alcohol and drugs, you know, and but you really had a hard time understanding him. And but then once you know what I'm saying, when you're around somebody, for especially like a friend with a thick accent or something, but when you're around them all the time, you pick up on, you understand them
Uh-huh.
totally. So that's what
Sure.
Wes Thompson was like. But to get that on paper would be totally impossible.
Right. Right.
How he spoke, yeah.
Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah, I understand what you're saying because it's like it used to be kind of older fiction, maybe turn of the century kind of stuff. They would do a lot of characters with really thick accents and they would
Mhm.
spell out the accent and you just
Yeah,
read it. And
yeah,
nowadays you're just like, it's
yeah,
impenetrable. You're just like, I don't know what they're saying. Like I just want to skip this
yeah.
and move on. So I
Mhm.
could see it being that way too. It's almost like, oh, he grumbled, but you need to actually, the reader needs to be able to actually understand what they're saying. So you're not just frustrating them
Yeah.
um, for
I
no
just like to be
reason.
realistic, and you know, I mean, I never, you know, describe people in the books. So you don't know what race they are, you don't know anything. And but I mean, one thing I
Hmm.
learned as a cop is you can be any race in the world. You know, thugs, any race, talk. A
Uh-huh.
lot of them talk the same way. You
Sure.
know, it's a street slang. You know, you don't have to be a certain race to talk that way. So
Right.
and you know, I purposely don't want to give up, you know, descriptions of people, you know, because of that, because um it's just not, thugs are thugs, you know, and then
Uh-huh.
they have a
Sure.
way of talking, you know, and
Right.
that's what I want to stay true to, is just the thug,
Right. No,
And the second girl had a few of them. The Frank Mars series had a few of them. Thugs.
yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's also the you get to imagine them however you want, right? I think
Yeah.
sometimes people
Yeah.
over describe things versus just
Yeah.
kind of, give the person what they need, let their imagination, take it from
I
there.
actually, yeah, that's like I said, purposeful. I don't like to have a picture in my head of I mean, I don't even know what Frank Moore looks like, really,
Mhm.
And so I often think, if an actor were to be Frank, who would it be? And I really can't. I mean, anybody can be
Right, sure.
Frank, but yeah, so it's I don't see things, I'm very visual, but I don't see faces, of
Mhm.
characters. I see their words, and how they, talk, and their mannerisms and things like that.
Right, sure. No, that's a beautiful way to think about it, actually.
Mhm.
I know sometimes I was doing an interview once, and they're like, if you were to cast somebody as this character, and I'm like, I've never thought of it. I have no idea. I
Mhm.
don't know enough actresses to even kind of run down a roster.
Mhm.
Um,
I think
so
Jennifer Gardner would be a great Frank Marr. Have you
yeah,
ever seen
sure.
in Peppermint? She is tough.
I think so.
That
Is
movie
she?
Peppermint, I love it. And but Frank could easily be Frankie,
Sure.
Frankie, or it could be a girl, a woman. But so I mean, I would see her doing it, but when I'm writing, do I see her? No, not at all.
Right.
But or anybody, but yeah. So no, I don't look at it like that either. I wouldn't know.
Sure. No, I think that makes sense. That it's the characteristics, like what are the characteristics of the person, right? Either they're tough or
Yeah.
they're smart or whatever, and that's goes beyond gender, what you look like, So, um, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Um, any lasting lessons, from the time booking shows and things that you carry with you to this day?
Lessons?
Just life
Um,
things learned about life.
no, that's a tough question. Something that I like, I'm sure there are. It's music has always been a huge part of my life, and I mean, I have playlists for what I write, and the music, from that time has totally stayed with me. Um, I think really the one thing that I'm my brain is going to is like all the lives that have passed, that
Sure.
because of heroin, or stuff
Oh.
like that,
Hmm.
I never, I'm glad I didn't. Gosh darn, and it probably would have been easy for me, anybody. I'm
Sure.
sure it's easy for anybody. Never did it though. So, um, Frank Barr was a drug addict, and or is he's still alive? He's not dead, but I think one life lesson would be, like just what, and Hunter S. Thompson, blowing his brains out.
Hmm.
That was just that. If you could take the time I knew Hunter S. Thompson, it would just be a few hours over the course of a few years. But those few hours I had with him were incredibly impactful. I mean, I like, so it hit me when he killed himself, because he was such an incredible talent and writer, and he had so much more to say, and he just took his life. Um, so yeah, that was, that. I don't know if that answers your
Sure.
question, because I just
No.
really, you know,
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. I mean, there's not looking for a particular answer. I just,
you know,
I always, what and like I mentioned to you, it's I'm horrible about being like, if I was ever working for Oz, the curtain would have been pulled off of him all along. I always tell everyone like what exactly what I'm thinking and doing. But one of the goals with the show is I really want people to get a chance to like meet the author, like the person. So
mhm,
that's why I kind of like to look back at like the history leading to you being an author and kind of how that affected you as a person, not just
mhm,
as a writer, but just as a person, because I think it'll all filter into your writing one way or the other.
Oh yeah, all my life
Yeah,
experience it filters
sure.
into
Yeah.
writing. I
Yeah.
can't
So,
imagine myself not writing. I just can't. It's been a part of my life since I was as young as I mean, 15, 14, when wrote stupid poetry. It's just like the dumbest poetry in the world. Now it's like, oh, I'm going to win a Pulitzer. I'm going to be the best poet in the world. And it
right.
sucked, I mean, but,
Mhm.
and then I
Right.
had to be a novelist and, I never realized how long it would take, but it took a while and I finally became one.
Yeah, yeah, very good. And then last thing, touching on the past stuff, like the LA kind of period, right? Because I know you've moved out since, but Roadside Prophets, there's a really funny you know, it's funny for me. I love talking failure. Like anyone brings it up, I will tell you all of my failings. I'll forget some because there's a laundry list, but I'll happily say all of them. But um, it was funny on your website because then when you talked about it, you put some of the bad reviews, on there.
Mhm.
And I don't think I noted them, but if someone wants to find them, I'll have your website linked in the description. People can go on there and see if they like. But I wonder just not so much about the bad reviews, just about how like you dealt with the criticism kind of back then when you get those reviews, and then how you deal with like criticism now.
It's a good question. I mean, it's funny with Roadside Prophets, in certain markets, it just didn't do well. It was not a wide release, it was limited theatrical release. And uh, I mean, I think it's like 80-something% on Rotten Tomatoes or so. I love Rotten Tomatoes, but I mean,
Uh-huh.
um, it got some great reviews, but I remember Sacramento Bee just I think praised it, but then like LA Times, where it was based on, and it panned it, and it hurt, big
Sure.
time. The one thing my editor told me though is, a couple of things. First of all, do not read the Amazon or the Goodreads reviews. Don't do it. So I did, and
Right.
it's like if your doctor gives you a certain medication, he goes, don't Google about side effects because you're going to end up like messing with. I Google, Doctor
Uh-huh.
Google,
Right.
but with the second girl, really, I'm trying to think, it got some real terrible reviews, like on Amazon and stuff like that, and Goodreads, like 1 star, and things like that. And I got fan mail. I wish I had some of it handy. I'd read it to you. In fact, I
Uh-huh.
did that. You've heard of Noir at the Bar?
I have, yeah.
Okay. Well, I've done a few Noir at the Bars, and the one in New York City that I did was really fun because I said, I don't like reading. I
Right.
hate it. But you read there, but I decided I'm not going to read this time. I'm gonna pull out my bad reviews. And, I
Oh,
just read my
funny.
bad reviews, and it was really, really fun. Because I can look back at it now and just really, like it's different if you were to get a bad review like from, Chicago Tribune or the New York Times or, LA Times or something like that. That hits you a little harder,
Uh-huh.
but now I can look at like Amazon and Goodreads and things like that and certain blogs and stuff like that. And that's your opinion and it's great. You
Hmm.
can have that opinion. It hurts more if it were like if the New York Times panned me, I would be
Sure.
I don't know a writer that wouldn't be, but or any, major, newspaper. But that fortunately hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure it will,
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
That's funny that you mentioned that. My son one time, and he's just about, geez, less than a month. He's going to be 13. But this was probably 2 years ago. So he was like 11. Him and his buddies, like they did a little drawing competition just amongst themselves, like these 4 or 5 boys. They drew, and he's always been really dedicated to it. So like you'll get, and they'll say, oh, limit screen time, but we didn't with him so much because half the time he was on it, he was just drawing on his iPad or whatever, and he would spend an hour or two. And like, he's working on his art. I don't, we could give him paper, but he's not watching videos. He's actually trying to do
Good.
something constructive
Good
for
for him.
himself. Yeah. And so, but they did this one competition like after school, and one of the kids put him in last or something. Like, it wasn't overly cruel, just didn't like, put him like below everyone. And he was really upset. I was like, okay. I was like, come here. So I went on Amazon, clicked on the 1-star reviews to like my books. And there's not, because there's not tons of reviews anyways, but he looked at a few, and then a few of them, I mean, are like literally call me out by name and go, Mr. Hincy, you shouldn't. So he read that. And he was so happy. He remembers it to this day. Occasionally he repeats them back to me. So maybe I shouldn't have done that, because now I have to hear them again. But
that's
it's
good life experience you're taught him, though. That's
good. Yeah. Well, and I think it's good to like have some balance to it, right? Like
what style, laugh at it. What art? Because I know my daughter was really, really into really good at manga and
okay.
A lot of the Japanese graphics type stuff.
Sure.
Not the tip, like the big eye, not like, but she loved Miyazaki, films, and my neighbor Toro, and all that. What is your son like?
Similar. He likes the manga. He likes comics and things. So, but he's what I think is really cool about what he wants to do. He's very interested in developing his own style. So that's what he does. So sometimes it's like, it's not the prettiest, most accurate kind of picture, but it's like he's really working on the style, and he's been working on it.
That's interesting.
All these years.
It's the same in writing. You want to develop your own style, and sometimes it's not the prettiest thing in the world, and that can get you some with the. And I don't want to say the wrong readers, because they're not really wrong, but it's just what they think. But if someone who's into classic mystery or police procedurals or whatever, when you try to break ground, it's just they don't accept it. It's the same with art. So as long as he understands that, that's actually cool that he wants to put his own style into something and not be precise and like how it is. My daughter is like that too.
Very good. Yeah, good for her. Yeah. I think about that a lot, because when I was in the corporate world for a long time, and I was a director of quality regulatory departments, and part of what I needed to do was set what the expectations were. Like, what are your goals for everyone? Because that's what people tend to do, right? You told me I need to do this, right? So you needed to be very definitive about it, right? I can go, you need to come in and do a good job. Define what a good job is, so when I was I've always been writing, like you. It was really like high school when I got the bug and wrote tons of really bad poetry. The worst thing that anyone ever gave me was a thesaurus, because then it's just look, this rhymes with that, and I'm brilliant. But I really thought about that, and one of the things I thought about when I had this concept, I want to be a great writer, but I realized, like, and this is 35, 40 kind of ish. I'm like, I have no definition of that. So if I was to tell someone that was coming to work for me, go be a great writer, I couldn't tell them what that means. I have this vague idea, but I couldn't tell them what it was.
I can tell you who it is,
sure,
is, but
right, yeah, I
don't know
make examples.
What it means,
right. But so I gave it a lot of thought, and one of the things was I want to break ground. I want to do so. I need some bad reviews. If I don't get any bad reviews, I'm not doing anything different, right? Because occasionally it's just people aren't going to get it. So that changed my relationship with reviews, because I'm like, if I get some bad ones, then I'm like, okay, good. I want to occasionally, I don't want to see like, the writing's just poor. Like, that would probably like stab my heart a little bit. But if it's, why did you do this? This didn't make sense. I read the silly satirical collection of Christmas stories. And it was set during the pandemic, and the whole conceit is it was these two writers that met at a writing conference, and then everything closes with the pandemic shutdowns. And to rekindle, they had this little romance. To rekindle, the guy starts sending her old time letters. And so, but because now with communication, everyone's so into emojis and things, he's typing these letters and he's still typing emojis into them, like those silly, like the,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. And so that's
cool.
the conceit, is that that's kind of the joke of it, that he's doing that still. But someone did not get that. It was very, very upset. I was like, okay,
Wow.
that's okay. That's the joke. You didn't get it. That's cool. But that's, I wanted it to, if you don't follow it
people
along,
like that, you can't like, get hurt by it, I mean, you can get hurt by like if like one person after another says you suck, then
right.
that can maybe. But then I don't think it would get through my editor through Josh if it sucked. He's
Sure.
really, good, and
Right.
if I turn in something that sucks, he's gonna say, David. I did have my agent one time when I wrote some. I was rejected a lot before I got published.
Sure.
And I remember I wrote one book and. She said sort of the same thing Bill Stanky said when I wanted to book Hunter S. Thompson, but it wasn't like, are you sure you want to do this? But it was something like, are you sure or do you think this is ready to submit? And she isn't the type of agent that would like, just say, no, let's try this, let's try that. But no, she does offer really good advice and I take it. But if I say, no, it's ready, she'll maybe teach me a lesson because I think she knows it's not. And,
right.
Not like, rejected. And some couple of them, editors nowadays are a little more kind, I think. I got my first rejection when I was 17 for a book I wrote, 300-something pages when I was 17 over the summer.
Oh, wow.
And when I was 18, I got a rejection. And, at that time, you didn't need, they would take, a lot of publishers would take unsolicited manuscripts. And I think of that editor, I'll leave it with this. I think if that editor knew how old I was, she would have been more kind. But it broke.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is, you don't know like exactly like what the story is. That's why I've never, I'll, occasionally someone will go, oh, do you mind, reviewing my book or something? And then I actually don't give a lot of feedback now unless I know the person really well and I can just kind of talk to them and like read it and kind of give you, where I'm coming from. We can have a verbal conversation. People like you don't know very well. I'm like, I don't want to because I don't want to, like, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what you're trying to do exactly. Like, I'm not going to give you some bad feedback on it because it might be something great that doesn't land with me. You might have something else going on, but
that's tough. That's tough to do.
It is, it's tough. So, God bless the agents and editors like going through it. But yeah, you do get the ones that are like, I'm gonna teach this person a lesson, and you're like,
no,
not
like
the right
that.
lesson.
She wasn't like that. I was
okay.
actually I was joking. She would never do that. But it wasn't so bad. If it was that bad, she would have said, no, I don't think this is ready.
Oh, sure.
But she thought it was good enough to send out. She's certainly not going to send out something terrible to editors at major publications and stuff like that.
Oh,
so maybe
I was referencing the editor you mentioned.
Yeah. Oh no, that yes. Yeah. I thought you were talking about my agent, but that. Yeah, again, there was no agent that it went through. It went through my dad. And what's your dad going to say? This is good, right. Good, son. This is so good.
Yeah, sure. That's funny. So I wonder then, moving to your time in the force, so you switched communities pretty, when we alluded to it earlier, not even alluded, we talked about it a little earlier with, you kind of went from a very artistic community to, the law enforcement, community out there. Besides having the notion that you had always wanted to be a cop, was there anything else that led you? Because, if you don't mind me asking, how old were you about when you did that?
I was older. I was an older cop. I was like 33.
Oh, okay. So what led you to make that, career change?
Honestly, it was really, it was something I always, fancied. And I got to a point in my career as an independent producer where I started thinking, I want health insurance. I want, I want to have a family, I want something
Hmm.
stable. My dad was foreign service, but I think he did other things. I'm not sure. And so I sort of grew up with that kind of structure and that kind of thing.
Sure.
Um, and I also, and I'm not going to say that wasn't in my head. I also thought it would strengthen me as a writer.
Hmm. Sure.
Um, and so with that, I went in, and I'm not military, college, and not military or anything like that. And so I had no background in law enforcement.
Uh-huh.
Um, so that was a little scary at first, not like being able to take care of myself, but like thinking like, am I gonna, you know, I'm not military, and I'm gonna have a gun on me all
Right.
the time and stuff like.
Hmm.
But the academy was it was a good academy. It was 8 months.
8 months. Wow.
Yeah. And a few of those, couple of those were in Quantico,
Hmm.
it, there, and so there's a lot of structure there. So it was good.
Hmm. Very good. And it was and I think I read it on the bio, but that was you did academy like in Washington, right? Washington, DC.
Yeah, the
I
Metropolitan
understood.
Police Department
Okay.
Academy at Blue
Hmm.
Plains. Yeah.
Right. Is there a reason did you go from like LA in the sense that everyone calls everything in this like 100-mile kind of radius here, LA? Did you go directly from like LA to there, or was there any
Yeah.
stops? Yeah.
Yeah. In DC, I graduated high school in DC. And then I went to,
Okay.
after that, I went to a small Presbyterian college in North Carolina, and then called Montreat Anderson College. And I went there because my sister was there, my older sister. And then my mom had moved with my little sister to Seal Beach, California.
Oh, okay.
And so I thought, I'm going to go to college there because I wanted to get into film. No, originally journalism, and then have a free room right up 2 blocks from the beach. So,
Sure.
so I was in LA in Long Beach and, California for, 14 something years. And when I decided I'm going to be a cop, before I only wanted to try to get into Washington, DC, because I knew DC. And I mean, I was doing push-ups, sit-ups, I smoked, I quit smoking, I was running. And then I remember I got a call from the lieutenant and said, the academy starts on Monday. Can you come? And literally, I
Wow.
packed 2 bags, left everything else in my mom's garage, and I flew to Washington, D.C. and went to the academy.
Oh, wow. That's an
Yeah.
amazing story. Yeah,
Mhm.
my nephew just started the academy in Nashville. So
Oh,
he just went out. Actually, I shouldn't say I guess it's been about a month now, but yeah, he had just we had a little more advanced notice of it. I know it is a pretty quick. It was kind of like okay, you're accepted. We have academy starts in 2 weeks or something, right? And it's
yeah, it's quick. I mean,
yeah.
it's a test, I think. you know,
Uh-huh. Sure.
I mean, they get academy classes that open, and then they got to fill it. So
Right.
once it opens, you got to go, or that you got to wait for the next class, and you don't know how long that's going to be. It depends
Right.
on budget or whatever.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, well, good for him. He's
Yeah. Yeah,
be a
sure.
brother in blue. They're all
Very
like,
good.
I mean, I have my writing family, I have my music family, I have my cop family.
Right. Yeah, sure. Was there
Mm.
anything because it almost seems like you're drawn to countercultures, right? You're like the punk rock and stuff, and then you go to the police department, you're dealing with, I know at one point it was drugs and like narcotics and things, right?
Mm.
Um, do you think you're drawn to countercultures? Is that something I'm
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I went, I was detailed to intelligence section, and when not before 911, but I was also there for 911, and I went to the Pentagon with my partner. But before that, DC is obviously it's the capital, so you get a lot, like with all that World Bank, IMF stuff, and you know, you would get anarchists there, you know.
Sure.
And they were not called Antifa then, which now it's sort of, they call them Antifa, but back then it was called Black Bloc, BLOC Bloc.
Okay.
And they weren't, you know, African American. It was just Black Bloc goes back to, I don't know, like the 18th century. I don't know how long far back it goes, but it's an anarchist group. And so of course, you know, they know my background, you know, and you know, hey, you know, Swinson, can you like maybe you know, I didn't go deep cover. I went undercover and you know, slept in abandoned buildings and a church with them, and you know, and some of them are bad. They're really bad. Okay. I'm talking about Molotov cocktails and really bad, and they're criminals. Some of them are really good kids, man, you know, and they're just like, and I gravitate to them, you know, I mean, they're like into the scene, into the music, and, you know, and I didn't get any, I mean, they weren't who I was really looking at, because you have to like figure out, okay, these guys are not the ones I'm after, but I would still gravitate toward them and like hang out with them and want to be with them, you know, and you know, so yeah, you know, I mean, I really, you know, there's something about the scene, and it's changed, you know, it's just, but I think it's become something new now. Like a lot of the kids, even my daughter, you know, my gosh, she was wearing Doc Martens and like those, you know, those checkered pants and stuff like that. I'm going, you know, I had Doc Martens, and oh, Daddy, okay, you know, I used to be cool, man. I didn't dress the part. I mean, I didn't dress like, you know, the part, but you know, I was into the music, and you know, my friends had purple hair. You know, I mean, mohawks. So, oh, okay, Daddy, okay, whatever. But I mean, it's sort of like becomes something new now, and it's I don't want to say emo. That's even old, but the kids are, you know, the ones, you know, I know are like getting into that old music, old,
For sure. Yeah.
and stuff like that. So it's cool. So it's not going to go away, you know.
It's not. It's not. I was joking with our kids because we have. Let's see. But I get her age right. Our oldest daughter is going to be 25 next month. Her and my son's birthday date wise are very close, so she'll be 25. The next daughter is going to be 24 in November. She'll be 24 this year. She's a 2000 baby. That she anchors me in their ages. The next one down is 17. She graduates this year, and then we have my son that's going to be 13.
17,
yeah. And so, but they've gotten a lot, very into a lot of the 90s stuff. And so I joke with them because I'm like, that's when I was in high school and things was in the 90s. And I'm like, you know, this is all the stuff we were doing then. And she was like, shut up, you weren't doing it. You weren't doing
it. Yeah. I left Bogart in 1989. And then, but obviously when I was in the police academy, I met like a couple of guys that were totally into the music. One guy had Mommy's Little Monster, Social Distortion tattooed on his ankle, you know, and you know, I go, you like Social Distortion? He was like in his 20s, you know. Goes, oh yeah, man, I love Social Distortion, and you know, so there were a few guys and gals, you know, back, you know, on the department that were really into the music, and you know,
sure.
In DC, it was the 930 Club where you would go like to see the bands, you know. So I saw a few bands there.
Oh, very cool. Was there anything? So I wonder two things. One is that there was a term, narco fencing. I wonder if you could explain to me. I don't know what it is. If you could explain what that
I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure we coined it.
Okay.
I specialized in. I became an expert in property, and like where property went, and the burglar. You know, the burglar. You know, home breaking into homes and stuff. They had their ear to the curb. They know everything. They know who shot who and killed who at the such and such corner. They know if there was they know everything. So you get a burglar to work with you. You can close homicides. You can close everything. You just,
Wow.
you know. But what we did was we would find out where property goes. And we figured 4 different places, and we called it narco fencing because a lot of the burglars are addicted, have substance abuse problems. You know, in DC, it's mostly crack and heroin at the time. I don't know now, but okay, so you get a laptop, you get a jewelry, you get, you know, whatever. Where do you go? Where do you take it? So there were like 4 different places we figured that people take it, you know, and then we would, you know, one of them was, you know, the obvious, which was a drug house where they trade the property for narcotics. And then there we got into organized crime too, the Russian mob and all that kind of stuff. But and then oversee a lot of very sensitive stuff. But it was the narcotics that we were at, you know, those kind of places. So when they took it to a certain place like that, we would, you know, obviously, you know, work that place and get in, and then you take it from there and you go up the ladder. So then eventually you get to the people that are bringing in property. Will get you anywhere, man. And eventually we had like a truckload of stuff, you know, that, you know, through Target or whatever, and trading for kilos and, you know, stuff like that. And I was working after that. I was working HIDTA, high intensity drug trafficking, with the ATF as task force, and so that's where narco fencing came from.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder then,
Property,
like,
trading property for narcotics, stolen property.
right. It's funny, it's everything's like follow the money, right? It's like it's follow this trail and it leads you places. But I wonder then, because with your experience with you know, the drugs and stuff, with like you had mentioned, like Hunter S. Thompson and things, right? On that end of it, and then dealing with the bad guys and it. How do you feel like with the whole, like, you know, quote unquote war on drugs?
I think they're doing it all wrong. But you know, I think marijuana should be legal. It is in most everywhere. I don't think that drugs should be legalized, like, you know, because you're legalizing death when it comes to like heroin or cocaine or, you know,
like fentanyl now, which is the big
fentanyl is death.
You're right, exactly.
But it's not the fentanyl that's killing. It's like it's you know, fake fentanyl, you know, but real fentanyl can kill you too. But you know, that's what it is. That's really replaced so much. Back in my day, it was like PCP and crack and heroin. Now it's like fentanyl, and you know, methamphetamine is still there too. But that's death, man. But I have friends, and one is an incredible writer who I want to shout out and give a shout out to, J. Todd Scott. His first book, The Far Empty. He was a working supervising DEA agent, like in charge of the whole Southern District or whatever. But so he did all that, you know. And another buddy of mine, I can't give up what band he was in because I don't know if he'd want me to do that. But he was in a major punk band in LA. He became a DEA agent. And he got involved in some pretty heavy stuff. And I know that guys like that, they're doing incredible work. Not just DEA, but local law and, you know, enforcement and stuff like that. But the war on drugs, I just think it's going the wrong direction. You know, they're not focusing on, you know, climbing that ladder. You know, I'm talking about mostly local. I mean, obviously DEA doesn't really care about like you know, they want to get the big stuff, you know, because it's not worth it to them. But so I think they're doing a pretty good job. You know, ATF actually is involved in a lot of narcotic gun stuff, so they're doing really great. But overall, I'm talking city by city, you know, it's not much of anything.
Right. Yeah, that's why, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask you. So, like, you know, California, of course, marijuana is legal now and things, and and so many states now, it is. So, and it's never, I always thought it was like, a bit silly because I equate it very much to like liquor. Like, some people like, get high with some weed. Some people like to get high, having a few drinks. I don't think there's a big, the slippery slope argument was the one I always got in high school. I don't think it's always a slippery, slope. Like you can drink and never do anything else. You can smoke weed and never do anything else, or you can.
Drinking will kill you too. But I mean,
Absolutely.
That's another part of the war on drugs is that they're really not treating the people addicted the way they should. There's
Sure.
now certain people belong in jail, and if you commit a crime that a violent crime and drugs are associated, then yeah, but a lot of time in my experience, the ones committing a lot of burglaries and stuff like that that didn't involve crimes of violence would get thrown in, not a lot of times, all the time, would get thrown in with the murderers and
Mm-hmm.
and all those people, and it's they'd either come out worse, or some of them would get sober in there and then they come out, but then they don't have the help they need when they get out. And then there's a trigger, their mom dies or whatever, and they're right
Mm-hmm.
back at that drug, of choice. And, you need lifelong help. And there are some really good places, but getting people into those places, like the one in Colorado, judges just, they're all full. So judges really won't do it. And,
Sure.
but if you had more places in the long run, that would cut down crime incredibly, man, because you'd have these guys actually and gals getting well,
Right.
which is what you
Yeah,
want.
sure.
But people don't think about that in prison. They don't think about you getting well,
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not talking pedophiles or anything like that. Get an island somewhere, castrate them, put them on an island surrounded by deadly sharks,
Right.
or like whatever, But I'm not talking
Right.
about like that or rapists.
Right.
I'm talking about just and I'm also not saying there. Some of the people I dealt with came from good families, and then they
Mm-hmm.
lost their jobs because of drugs. So that's
Sure.
part of the war on drugs. It's like figuring out what to do with these people.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to say the person because it's their story, not mine, but we had someone we were close with who completely lost her way, mostly with weed, but just stopped doing anything else. Right. It's just like with alcohol, right? You just, you can become a drunk, and you're unable to manage anymore. Um, and she had gone to rehab, and it was like none of it was for her, because she's like, everyone there is already at I'm smoking crack and prostituting, and I'm doing this. And so there wasn't anything for the like, no, it's like you have to wait till they completely fall off the earth, and kind of do it. And it's just like, no, don't you want to do it earlier? And it's like, and so it had helped her to some degree. There was some counseling and some things that did help, but then it also kind of minimized it, because it's like, well, everyone else is, literally doing crimes. Basically, they're prostituting, or they're selling drugs. They're doing these things. And there wasn't that place for no, I've lost my way. I can't, get up in the morning and be productive anymore.
Yeah, well, there are a place for them, but it takes money,
Sure.
it costs a lot of money, to get into
Right.
those.
Yeah. Well, and that was the money one. And it was still kind of like, oh, this. So
Really? Wow.
yeah. Yeah, so it's hard. But that's why I thought it'd be interesting to ask you with the perspective on it. There's some people come with the perspective of just it's all evil, very hard on it, and then other people,
No,
come from
no, it's
legalize
not.
everything.
I mean,
It's all fine.
we're all inherently have a badness to us, and
Sure.
we're all totally fallen, and any one of us can like totally fall off the edge, any one of us, not, I'm
Absolutely.
serious. And
Absolutely.
so I mean, but there are people that are, I believe, born inherently evil. Okay, there are things that if you're having those thoughts continuously, that there's something really effing wrong with you, man.
Sure.
You know, and those people
Sure.
are evil, you know. So I'm
Mhm.
not even talk about them, but the ones that I'm talking about are the ones that can totally fall because of alcohol or drugs or things like that.
Right.
You know, we're all capable of that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and I don't, you know, I mean, getting help, it can be tough. It can be
Mhm.
real.
Right. Absolutely. So awesome then. So let's transition over to just some writing talk. Like I always joke that, you know, because the show's named Writers Drinking Whiskey, I'm morally mandated to talk some writing. Um, so I want to ask you a few specific things. One is because I'm kind of the artsy fartsy writer, and I like to think about things like beauty and truth and all these things that people don't talk about anymore. Um, I do wonder though, with kind of the underworld, right? The kind of the crime underworld, whatever you want to call it. Is there, besides like your life experience, is there anything just from an artistic point, do you find some beauty in that or some truth do you derive from that situation?
Yeah, I mean, even when you're describing death, you know, it can be beautiful.
Sure.
You know, as horrible as that death may have been, I always like try to do that, and you know, when I'm describing a scene or death, and you know, the face of death or whatever, you know, try to do it in a way that's not, you know, blunt, you know, and
Hmm.
you know, there's a beauty in that, you know, mortal milky-eyed stare or whatever, you know. But
Hmm.
you know, yeah.
Right.
Um,
Sure.
and um, violence, you know, I mean, can be done well. You know, I mean, I, I I go to some of the directors who did it well, like Sam Peckinpah and yeah, obviously Quentin Tarantino. You know how they do violence so that it's not gratuitous.
Hmm.
It can be
Sure.
done well and descriptive, but not ugly.
Right.
Ugly is
Hmm.
not even a bad word, really. So ugly is actually the wrong
Sure.
word. You know, it's
Hmm.
I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean, because then part of the human experience is the ugliness too,
Mhm.
right? So it's not pretty, but it doesn't mean there's not some beauty inherent
Yeah.
in it, right?
And the way
Uh,
you show it and portray
mhm.
it,
Yeah,
definitely.
sure, sure. Was there anything that you see that commonly gets done wrong, right? When because there's tons, right, of things with, you know, crime fiction and such. Is there anything you commonly see, you know, see done wrong when that's depicted?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when it comes to handling evidence, you know, I see a lot of it that's wrong. Um, and interview and interrogation, you know, is often, you know, not often, but you know, couple, you know, so, yeah, so a lot of writers, you know, and filmmakers get it wrong. But
Mhm.
my friends don't. But you know, they're like, I mean, Jim Brady gets it right, and you know,
Sure.
Pelicanos, he gets it right. You know, people like that, they get, you know, but I don't really read the ones that get it wrong because I like get through 10, 15 pages and I just go, not my kind of thing. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, handling of evidence, the the lifestyle of a cop, you know, I mean, not lifestyle, what, you know, the culture, pop
Mhm.
culture, you know,
Sure.
a lot of times I get that wrong.
Mhm. So are you telling me that people don't always confess? You know, because like
When I'm there, yeah, they do.
very good.
No, I
Very
mean,
good.
no, I've had, but there's some classic confessions that I have, but
I'm sure.
you know, not everybody confessed, but you
Right.
know, oh, that's another thing. Yeah, when it comes to lawyering up and stuff, and you know, it's a fine art, like, you don't, I mean, prior to that, like, I don't even like to say interrogation. It's interviewing. It's like there's an art to it. And
Mhm.
reading someone's rights, there's an art to it, so that they sign and allow you to talk to them. And because
Uh-huh.
when you sign, the thing, a lot of people don't understand is, and I'm not giving up anything that's procedure, like a general order here, because I can't. But just because you sign the waiver doesn't mean that you have to talk. I mean, like, you can
Right, sure.
stop talking at any time, and you can just say, I don't want to talk anymore. Okay,
Right.
no problem. So a lot of times it's all that signing that waiver allows is for me to talk and get your story. That's
Uh-huh.
really all it's about.
Sure.
But you can stop anytime, man. You don't have to like tell me anything.
Mhm.
Um, so the whole good cop, bad cop, I mean, has its place, I can see that. And I've been a part of it. I'm not talking about physical violence or anything like that.
Sure.
Um, because the physical aspect can F up your case. I mean, it'll get thrown out. So
Sure. Right.
I've seen that on shows. I saw it in Monk. I'm rewatching all the Monk, and
Uh-huh.
and I love Monk. I love it, despite all that crap. But
Right.
the captain like takes a guy because it's personal, and they got him cleaned on a search warrant. Which I don't understand how they got the search warrant, but they got it. And he
Right.
throws the guy on the hood of the car and hits him. And there's tons of witnesses, including like people, regular people. That'll
Yeah.
get the case thrown out in real
Sure.
life, I mean, so
Right.
things like
Yeah.
that. But I forgive Monk, love the show.
Right, right. Well, sometimes if you really love the character, you can forgive things in
Yeah,
fiction,
yeah,
right? Like, so
yeah.
this is so
But if you're
well
writing
taken.
something real and trying to be real, like The Wire, they got it right. Things like
Uh-huh.
that. Don't mess up. Get it right.
Oh, sure.
Just takes the right consultant or the right person to call. I always tell my writer, friends, here's you got my email. If you have a question, call me. If I don't have the answer, then I know people that do.
Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, that's funny. Do you ever think you'll write about the your time with the punk rock scene, or have you already? I haven't just
On my deathbed, I mean, I
that's the
don't.
confessional on your deathbed.
No, nothing to confess. I mean, it's just like my life story. You talking about like fiction?
Fiction, yeah.
Oh, not yet. I haven't been inspired, but I've thought of
Okay.
things. But it's just it'd be cool. I just don't know the right way to approach it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I was
Yeah,
just curious because I mean, you
yeah.
clearly you
No, I
write
mean,
a
I've
lot
I've,
about.
I've thought about it.
Yeah.
It's in my head all the time. The music, and
Uh-huh.
but um, I just don't have the right story.
Sure. And so getting back to the dialogue a bit, because I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more on that. Um, so what do you think uh, to make dialogue sound authentic? Because sometimes you read it and it sounds very, especially when people write cops and things, right? Sometimes it's like the stereotypical cop talking, right? That's been on the same cop that you've seen since like
Mhm.
you were growing up and whatever show in the 50s, right? Um, how do you bring an authentic voice to it?
Read it out loud to yourself. But I think experience brings it, makes it authentic. But then again, you got to look at a lot of authors that weren't cops, and they make it authentic. And it's but they you know um like Pelicanos. I first met him way before I wrote, um, because he would do write-arounds, with homicide.
Mhm.
So he immersed himself in the culture, and
Sure.
step out and do the research, really know what it's like. Don't Google it. You're not going to learn, great
Right.
dialogue, cop dialogue by Googling. You got to like get in
Hmm.
there. And you can hang out with cops. I mean, there's, the reality is if you're going to do it like a write around, you have to sign a form that if you die, you're not going to sue, or you're not
Right.
going to sue, you'll be dead. But what I mean, but
Uh-huh.
um, but yeah, you do have to sign off. on it. And so yeah, get it right. And it's easy to get it right, and just I like to, like, when I write it, I like read it out loud.
Sure.
And
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm really big on reading out loud. Everything
yeah.
I do. My family thinks I'm crazy half the time, so I'm sitting out here.
Like you're talking to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I just talking.
Yeah.
And I've been working on a epic absurdist satire forever that I just finished.
Oh,
But
congratulations.
they would come out and I'd be laughing. They're like, "What are you laughing at?" And that's why I always knew it was good, because I'd come back to something I hadn't read in months and I read it back and it would make me laugh. And I'm like, "Okay, good. This is good." Like, what are you giggling about over there? And it's like the most awkward thing to say I'm laughing at myself.
Yeah, but also, I don't know if you've done this, but I'm sure you have. But a lot of times when I read something out loud and I like tear up and I choke up,
Sure.
then I know it's good.
Right.
And, I just go, and
Right.
but or I will chuckle and say, yeah, that's cool. I like that,
Yeah. That's the
then,
best. But yeah.
yeah, then that sucks, and then like I cut it out.
Yeah. Well, and it does, right? If I because I used to do nothing of note. I used to do a bunch of acting, a lot of community theaters, and the most people I ever acted in front of was like 800 or something. So
That's a lot.
but it was enough that it kind of got me attuned to like thinking like an actor and things, and so it's like when I write, there's that point when I read it out loud, I'm thinking like the actors through it. So, and then like then you really think about things a little different when you think about how would this character say it.
Yeah. I'm a terrible actor. I was asked to be the villain in The Cat and the Canary in college, and basically, I guess because I looked like the villain, and I lasted a week, and then the professor says, I don't think this is gonna work. So and there went my acting expectations. But yeah.
That's the end. Yeah. I wonder, is there maybe, and you can answer this more broadly if you like, but I'm just thinking, as a writer, what's the biggest risk you've taken?
Biggest risk? Writing, doing it, finishing it.
Just starting, sure.
Yeah, I don't. What are you talking about? Risk with like what you're writing, with what you're like trying to say, or just.
Well, I don't mean anything particular about it necessarily. Just I think it can be different for different people, right? Sometimes it's a career risk, right? Like
I mean, writing is a risk.
Sure.
If you're gonna write, you're putting yourself out there, man. It's a risk. So everything is a risk. Everything I've written, which is what, 6 books or whatever. It's putting it out there. It's a risk. I mean, failure and bad reviews and
right.
Yeah, it's all a risk. It's like every one of them is terrifying.
Sure.
It's just it's
Yeah. What would you think your biggest failure has been? Or have you had one? Maybe you don't.
Yeah, no, I've had some failures. Probably A Detailed Man. You talk about with what I wrote.
Oh, sure. I mean, you can take it wherever you want, but yeah.
Yeah, I really like that book, and it's not really a failure, because I don't. That's actually wrong, because when you write something and it gets out there, you did your job. You did what you're supposed to do.
Sure.
So it's really, you didn't fail, and no one failed. It just wasn't the time, or it didn't work.
Right.
So that's not really a failure. So I don't really know if creatively if I've failed, because just if something doesn't do well financially, or get the reviews you want, or become a bestseller, doesn't mean you're a failure.
Oh, amen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. That's a nice way to put it, right? Because sometimes we can get very, in America specifically, but I'm sure lots of parts of the world can get very commercial oriented and think, oh, this didn't sell as much as I wanted. And maybe that's the book that, they always joke about writers getting famous when we're dead, right? Maybe that's the book that's famous when we're dead.
Exactly. But the
who
thing
knows?
is, I have a pension. Okay. So
Mhm.
I can afford to write, and
Mhm.
for the books, not all of them to do great financially.
Right.
But I guess a failure would be if like I was stupid enough to, like, if I had a job and I got a big advance, to quit my job and think that
Uh-huh.
I'm going to be the greatest writer in the world, and all of a sudden you get that big advance,
Right.
doesn't sell, you're screwed.
Sure.
Don't give your job up, man. That would be a failure. That you'd fail if
Right.
you did
Yeah,
that.
sure.
You know?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Is I always it's because I had the corporate career I mentioned earlier, was that I had kids. I mean, I had my first daughter, I was 20. So
Wow.
I wrote all through that time, but always with I did inadvertently, and not to compare myself at all because it would be a silly comparison, but I heard the story much later on that Einstein early on was working at, I think, the patent office. And he mostly just worked on his theories, but he worked at the patent office, would do his job. And early in my career, what I did was I got really good at what I had to do, to where I could get my work done in 2-3 hours. That gave
Mhm.
me 5 hours to write while I was at
Yeah.
work. And so everyone thought I was super busy all of the time, and I was getting my work done and more usually, but I was using it for myself. So no one ever went,
Mhm.
oh, what's he doing? Because I tried to teach this to a few people when I was I do some consulting for them still. I'm not an active director anymore, but I have people that were super good. But they would do that. They'd get their work done super fast, but then they wouldn't work the rest of the day, and they'd go around talking to people. People like, they're not doing anything. And I'd be like, Jim, I'm just making up a name. You have to make yourself look busy.
Yeah.
You can't now wander around distracting everyone. They need that
Yeah.
time for whatever reason, right? Like everyone works at different paces. And so I always looked exceptionally busy because I was, but I was
Mhm.
using some of it, on myself. So
Mhm.
I see your point. There's the life, life
I
decisions.
wish I could say that for detective work, but I mean, unfortunately, I had to
Oh
work
yeah,
12,
sure.
16 hours,
Right,
straight,
right.
and,
Yeah.
you know, find 2 hours to write, not on the job, you just couldn't do
Right.
that. Because your
Oh,
mind is
sure.
not
That's a
there. You
completely
just
different
can't. It's
world.
just
Yeah.
your brain is
Yeah.
not in it.
Right.
And you get caught, you get in some trouble. So,
Sure.
but yeah, when I went home, I found the time. I didn't really write. I mean, the second girl, I was retired by that point.
Uh-huh.
So, but a detailed man, I was writing all through, like it took me years to write, and, an hour here, 2 hours there, or whatever.
And then so last thing with the writing bit, I was interested in your thoughts on, like, so I always like to bring something kind of current culture, pop culture, whatever you want to call it. There's the whole like AI thing, right? Everyone's like, AI is coming for the world. I was wondering on your thoughts with AI and writing specific, how it might relate, or what your thoughts are on it.
I don't support it at all, and I'll never buy a book that's written AI. I'm sure there will be people that'll do it, buy it,
Hmm.
well,
Sure.
whatever. But you know, I uh, I was pissed when I first learned that 3 of my books were in that um thing generated by AI, you know,
Hmm.
on that list and stuff like that. But you know, yeah, I think it's inevitable. I mean, of course,
Hmm.
art. I mean, art too.
Sure.
Movies
Right.
are the next thing. Characters that are not real.
Hmm.
Um, do I want to watch that? No, I'm not have no interest in it.
Right. Sure. Well, I actually wonder if there's going to be, getting back to the counterculture. I think there will be a counterculture kind of clash to that whole thing, right? As they've tried to go to um, AI, and I have no idea if this is true, and I haven't seen it because there was a time I was joking with my daughter the other day about this, that I used to watch my niece a lot when I was younger. So I was probably about 16. And so 16, and then I had kids young, right? 20. And then my son just kind of stopped watching. And then we had the grandkids here, but the grandkids have moved out. We have two grandkids now. They've moved out. So about the last 2 years, it's kind of hit I actually don't know what's happening. Like, I would know all the kid shows. Our nieces were here the other day and they're like, turn on Bluey. I'm like, what the hell's Bluey?
Oh, Bluey. Yeah. Okay. What? Okay.
Yeah. So, but I did hear a lot of people saying, like, some of I think it was the Disney Wish, I think was the movie.
Was it AI?
They a lot of people were like, it sounded like AI, like, and they haven't come out, but they're like, it really sounded like, it seemed like AI, it sounded like AI, and it did really poorly. And I think we're gonna hit a counterculture of it. That's kind of even if it sniffs of it, people. I think there's going to turn a lot of people off. There'll be some people that are like, I'll jump on the train and use it, but I think there's going to be a counterculture that's a lot of people that go, nope, I don't want anything to do with this. Like, the human stuff should be done by humans.
Real readers, stuff like that, they're going to figure it out like this. Yeah. You can't get the heart in it,
Right.
And I think you're going to be able to tell the difference.
Right. Yeah. I believe so too. I think and it's probably antiquated. I know I'm artsy fartsy in general, probably too artsy fartsy for my own good, but I really think there's the bleeding for your art, right? Like you were saying, like you get choked up when you would read it because like you put something of yourself truly in it. I don't think you can simulate that. I don't think you can
AI
synthesize it. Yeah. And so even as great as AI can get, it's still not going to be human and not going to know what that is to be human. And being human's always evolving, right? We're always, things are always changing. We're always reacting. So, but anywho, so I think it's perfect time then to transition into some shots here. So you can do shots.
But I'll try.
You don't actually have to do shots. My kids know
I don't have enough to do shots. This is all I have left.
Very good. You can do sips, which is what I do now. Because when you drink good stuff, you don't shoot it. You take sips of it. You enjoy it. So just rapid fire questions here. You can give me your first thoughts. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Very good. Greatest Chili Peppers number.
Flea. Are you talking about the band?
Yeah, the band. The greatest song, I should say.
Oh, song. I don't even know. I'm going to confess, I booked the Chili Peppers like 3 times, Golden Bear, Fenders like 2 times, once, and then Bogarts. I love the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but you're not asking me like Nick Cave's favorite song, Social Distortion's favorite song. Yeah, Red Hot Chili Peppers wasn't really, they have not reached, I'm sorry, you guys. Flea was in Roadside Prophets. Okay. He was in the band that was created in Las Vegas. He was the bass player, obviously. But they have not reached my playlist.
Oh, very good.
But only because it's just I don't know. I just never really connected with the Red Hot Chili Peppers music.
Oh, interesting. What this isn't on my list, but I feel compelled to ask now. If you had a playlist, you don't have to give me the whole thing, maybe 3 playlists of punk rock essentials, what would those be?
The bands essentials?
Maybe songs. Actually, no, you're right. Let's go bands.
Well, I want to not just say punk rock. I want to say punk alternative because it's not all punk, but Pixies.
Pixies,
Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, always, every day, all the time. Cowboy Junkies, far from punk, but sort of alternative, and I love them. Obviously Social Distortion and stuff like that.
Very good. Very good. I'll have to, I don't know all of them, so I'm going to have to check them out now. So you're enlivening my music list now. So
Nick Cave
thank
and the
you.
Bad Seeds. Nick
Yeah.
Cave is a genius, and I'm going to say it right out. He is. He's involved in. He's written a couple of screenplays too. The Proposition, which is Australian, which did with Guy Pearce. It did incredible. And I think Lawless, which was a Moonshiner thing with Tom Hardy. And but he also does soundtracks with Warren Ellis, who's also a bad seed. But he's been around since the 80s. He was a heroin addict, and he's totally sober now. And you know, if he plays, he's going to bring 25,000, 15,000 people. Depends on where he plays. But he's incredible. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I have to check him out.
Also, a great writer. He's a novelist.
Okay.
Yeah, his books.
Oh, very cool.
Well,
Yeah, very good. I'll try to have to get him on the show then. That'll be fun.
No, I don't. That'd be sort of impossible, but nothing's impossible. But he's in. I don't know where he's living now. He's probably in the UK somewhere. But he's pretty reclusive. If you get him on the show, you are the man. Yeah.
Now I feel like it's a challenge. Now my
because I've not seen an interview. I've not seen him interviewed anywhere.
Right. Very good. Very good. So returning slavishly to my list here, biggest pet peeve
in life or in writing?
Wherever you want to take it. In life, it could be writing, however you like.
I have a pet peeve. I just can't. I think with TV shows and film that get it wrong,
Sure. What's the worst piece of advice you ever got?
Can I be honest? I really haven't had bad advice.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, if I've had bad advice, I work it out on my brain, so I don't remember it anymore. Yeah.
Very good.
But I think all kinds of advice is worthy, unless they say, just I think pot is going to free your mind, or something like that. And I think someone actually told me that once. That's pretty bad advice. I have nothing against people that smoke weed at all. It's not for me. It makes me sleep. It makes me eat, and then sleep. It is not creative to me. Mushrooms, on the other hand, but I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think that would be it.
All right, very good. Have you ever witnessed anything inexplicable?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as a kid in Mexico City, and and when we were between countries, we would either be in DC or northern Minnesota at a lake, where my dad was born and raised, in this tiny town that had like 400 people. But yeah, a UFO to this day. it was probably a freaking balloon or something, but it's inexplicable. I mean, it was like incredible. It's in my brain still. Yeah, hell yeah. Well, a lot of things. That's not the only thing. I've witnessed a lot of things. And explain.
Sure, very good. It's funny. I just had on the last show I recorded was a gentleman that wrote a book on Sasquatch.
I love Sasquatch.
Yeah, and so he'd written a book on it, and we spent 3 hours talking Sasquatch, and I don't know how the audience is going to love it. I loved it because again, I'm a nerd. I was like, oh yeah, Sasquatch. But
I think if you were to ask the worst thing I ever did, I probably did a lot of bad things with my kid, raising my kid, but one of them was convincing her that Bigfoot was real. In my experience with Bigfoot when I was a kid in northern Minnesota and running into Bigfoot, which is not true. I did not. But it was a story I had, and that he's a good guy. He stinks, but he's a good guy. Bigfoot is in my culture, in my life. I mean, I totally believe there's a Bigfoot, and people are going to think I'm crazy. But I mean, I don't know how there could be, but I want to believe that he exists. They exist,
Sure. Very well. I mean, I just admitted I spent 3 hours. It'll be an episode here come October. So
Cool.
I'm with you. Awesome. So Los Angeles, psychedelic wonderland, fever dream, or backstabbing siren mistress to be avoided at all costs?
You mean having to live there or just visit?
I'm thinking
Avoid
live
at all
here.
costs if I have to live there. It's one suburb after another. You can't walk anywhere.
Yeah.
Part psychedelic, part avoid it at any cost. Sorry. I was 14 years there.
Yeah, very good. And then last question here. Favorite podcast, and why is it Writers Drinking Whiskey?
Honestly, this is my favorite podcast, dude. I have not sat here and talked to somebody for so long. It is like we're sitting at a bar and having a good conversation, great conversation. It's this is the longest podcast I've ever done.
Oh, very
I know it's going to be edited down, totally.
Yeah.
To whatever time you have. But it's
that's really not.
Yeah, I'm not lying. Dude.
I'm going to edit out the parts that we talked about editing out. The rest we'll be here and we'll be chatting. So that's the magic of it. But, awesome. So cool. So thank you for that. So then if you want to transition over, I know you're gonna you had some pages you could read from us from Sweet Thing. So if you wanna give it a reading that a try.
Not pages. It's a half a page.
Okay, very good.
I kissed her on the corner of the mouth, reached for the pack of cigs on the nightstand and offered one. I lit hers first and then mine. Grabbed the ashtray and set it on the bed between us. She blew a perfect smoke ring. I watched it as it lingered for a bit and frittered away. She grabbed the bottle of vodka off the nightstand on her side of the bed, took a hefty swig, passed it over to me. I did the same and handed it back, and after another healthy swallow, she set it back on the nightstand. She snuffed her cigarette out and said, "I have to pee," and slipped out of the bed. She walked like she was moving to a song in her head, made love the same way, always at the end. Her back would arch, and she moaned like the gentle release of breath held, finally letting go. That's what I liked most, the sound, the visual, how she lived at the moment. It was intoxicating, addicting. Her death was like that too.
Thanks again for that. Thanks again so much for spending the time. I'm honored that I get to be the longest podcast. And I've enjoyed our time here. But as I always like to say on the show, it's the last call. You don't have to go, but you'll have to restart the video. For anyone viewing, the last question I like to ask, and I'm contemplating changing this come season 3 here, but we're still season 2, so I'll ask it. What's one piece of advice you would give to anyone watching? It can be something small. Just what's one small thing that people can do just to make their life a little bit better?
Or anything, not just writing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't have to think about that because I've sort of made my life that way, and I've made tons of mistakes, without a doubt. Okay, but don't give up. Number one, and number two, don't ever realize the obstacles in your way and how hard something can be. Legal, it's very hard to go bust into the Department of Treasury or whatever,
Right, sure.
That's stupid. I'm talking about my life or whatever. Just don't, it can be hard getting published. It can be phenomenally hard, but some people it might just be really easy and they might have a lucky break, but don't give up if it's not.
Sure. Also, yeah, that's great advice. And with a great misnomer there, just don't look at that as then you're breaking into a bank. That's probably not. See the obstacles there.
Yeah, I want to get a quick $1 million. I'm going to bust into a bank. Dude, there are serious obstacles there.
Yeah, right. Awesome. So if people want to learn more about you, there's of course the website, which I'll have linked here. Is there anywhere else you would point them to?
Yeah, I'm public on Facebook. Find me there. It's actually called my punk rock promotion thing at Fender's, not Bogart's, was called Sluglord Presents. SLUGLORD presents. So I think that's what I am on Facebook. But if you just find my name, David Swinson, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So friend me there. I'll accept.
Very good. Very good. So awesome. So thanks again. I think I do have a little bit of my my oceans. So
and I have a tiny bit. So cheers.
Very good. Cheers, my friend.
I'll swallow the rest of this.
Extra shots. Of course, there's really no last call here because you can restart the video, or you can reply to it with a comment to today's question. So, question: what is the most punk rock thing you have ever done? Let me know in the comment section there. I'll let you know mine. It's probably not going to be that punk rocky, but I did wear the glasses today because I feel like that is punk rock at its core. Or maybe not. Anyways, thanks for joining us. Cheers.